my name is Edith Emily Higby Grannis, and I come to you from Glenwood Cemetery in Mankato, Minnesota. I am at the grave of my father, Samuel Higby Grannis, and I want to tell you about him and about his brother. They were in the American Civil War. My father lived to be 93. He had a very long and prosperous life. He fared much better than many other soldiers from that war. When he was 80 years old, I gave him a notebook, and he proceeded to write in that notebook every single day. A few years later, I published that notebook. It is titled, From New Hampshire to Minnesota, The Memoirs of Samuel Higby Grannis. And I in particular want to tell you about his time in the Civil War and about his brother. They came to Minnesota in 1860, and they settled in the Vernon Center area in Vernon Township. They lived in a 2-room log cabin at first. In 1865, when the dangers of the Indian Wars seemed to have passed, Samuel, my father, and his brother Henry enlisted in Company F of the 1st Minnesota Heavy Artillery. They enlisted in Mankato, and then they were mustered in at Fort Snelling. They traveled south. It was February, so the ice on the river allowed them to travel south as far as the cross on the frozen Mississippi River. From there, they took trains through Chicago and on down to Tennessee. Now, this winter travel was very hard on them, and my father spoke jokingly about learning for the first time how to sleep on the soft side of a board, meaning sleeping on the ground. Henry in particular did not fare well, and he caught pneumonia, but he recovered from that, and as hard as the cold weather was on them, the infection and disease that came about in the warmer months was even worse. Henry became very, very ill, and at that time, they did not believe that the soldiers were ill. Oftentimes, they thought they might be malingering, and so they were still forced to do guard duty. My father still remembers very fondly a man named John Fassett. He was a scrappy Irishman, but he befriended them. And when Henry Grannis's name was called to do guard duty one night when he was very, very ill, John Fassett stepped forward and said, "I'm Henry Grannis," and did the guard duty for him that night. But Henry became even more sick. He was admitted to hospital, and even in hospital, those that were not terribly, terribly sick, that could still get up and walk a little bit, were expected to get up 3 times a night to care for the other men that were even more ill. And in these circumstances, Henry became even more sick. My father went to visit him, and the doctor took him aside and said, "Are you his brother?" He said, "Yes, I am." He said, "He's not going to make it through the night." He sat with Henry, and Henry died in his arms. My father, who was sick himself with the mumps, was so worn down and weary. He lay down beside his brother, and slept there for the rest of the night. In the morning, they took Henry to the morgue. Father came back with a pair of shears and cut a lock of hair off of Henry's head and sent it home to his mother and father, and there it remained a beloved keepsake. My father survived the war, came back and lived in Mankato. He was quite prosperous. He was a business partner with George Palmer. They owned grain elevators in Minnesota, Iowa, and South Dakota. He sold out his interests to R.D. Hubbard. You may have heard of him from Hubbard Mills. Mother and father built a home at 326 Warren Street in 1915. It still stands. Mother died in 1922. When father was 83 years old, he and I traveled down to Tennessee. Our goal was to go to Henry's grave. We retraced the steps or the path that they had taken in 1865. And we reached Henry's grave, which is marked with a simple stone that says Henry Grannis, Minnesota. At the entrance to the National Military Cemetery at Chattanooga is a tablet that was inscribed in 1863. It reads, "No vision of morning strife, the warrior's dream alarm. No braying horns, no screaming fife, at dawn shall call to arms."